Okay, welcome back for the Worlds of Christendom, Contraction, Expansion, and Division, 500 to 1300, Section 2, Byzantine Christendom, Building on the Roman Past. Now, the role of the Byzantine Empire in global trade is significant, especially as the empire expanded. Thinking about exploring the regions in which the Byzantines came into contact, identify the effects of these interactions, examine the role and function of the city of Constantinople, comparing it to the trade city of Florence may be a valuable exercise for you to do. Analyze the similarities and differences in economic and political structures between the two cities. That's a great essay-type question. And consider examining the art and architecture of each city as well. The Hagia Sophia in itself represents a good case study of Byzantine culture and how it reflects the themes of the Byzantine Empire. Other than the examination of Western Europe and the Byzantines, this chapter will also look at the Christian world in Africa, Russia, and Asia. So I want you to keep that in mind as well. And we'll look at these expressions of Christianity as similar and different from Christianity as it was centered in Rome and Constantinople. We'll also cover economic and social structures in the Worlds of Christendom and consider how labor was organized, particularly the systems of coerced serfdom or feudalism and free peasant agriculture, and of course the guild organizations that were big in Europe. Okay, Byzantine Christendom, building on the Roman past. Now, the Byzantine Empire had no clear starting point. It was really a continuation of the Roman Empire. Some scholars date its beginning to approximately 330 CE with the founding of the city of Constantinople. It was a smaller but more organized Roman Empire. The Western Empire collapsed in the 5th century, and the eastern half survived another 1,000 years. And that's the Roman Empire specifically, and that's what became the Byzantine Empire, that eastern half. And the Eastern Empire contained ancient civilizations like Egypt, Greece, Syria, and even Anatolia. And Byzantium was really, like I said, the eastern section of the Roman Empire, and it became the sole heir to Rome after it fell in 476. Now, Byzantium never regained control over the Western Mediterranean except for a very brief period under Emperor Justinian, and was much smaller in terms of territory, but it did have a strong administrative organization and could mobilize its wealth for warfare. Some of the Byzantine advantages over the Western Empire included a wealthier and more urbanized, their more defensible capital. The wealth and splendor of the court, sitting right along those trade routes between the East and the West, the empire was extremely wealthy. It had a decidedly Greek character, but also influences from the Persian court ceremonies, such as high officials and silk robes. The political power was centralized in the figure of the emperor, who was celebrated in the court with a mechanical throne. It rose above his visitors and even mechanical lions that roared. They did have a shorter frontier, which means they had to control less. They did have access to the Black Sea, which then in turn gives them access to Asia, and they commanded the Eastern Mediterranean, and so that's that cultural crossroads between Europe and parts of Afro-Eurasia. They had a stronger army, navy, and a merchant marine, and it was really a continuation of the late Roman infrastructure. And they made conscious efforts to preserve Roman ways. And the empire sustained 4 centuries of attack and assaults from the hostile Western states like Venice, some Catholic crusaders, Muslim Turkic armies, before Constantinople finally fell to the Ottomans in 1453. The Byzantine State, the Arab and Islamic expansion really reduced the size of the Byzantine Empire. The politics, like I said, were centralized around the emperor in Constantinople. And the territory shrank in 1085. As, like I said, those Western states, Venice, the Crusaders, some Turks, really shrank after a lot of those different groups attacked, and finally fell in 1453. And here's a map that shows you a good idea of what we're talking about here. You see this orange? That's the that's the Byzantine Empire. You see the striped orange lines are the territories gained by Justinian, Emperor Justinian. So you can see it's very similar to the territory of the old Roman Empire, but heavier influences from the Persian Empire and even some Egyptian culture and ancient Greece culture. Okay, the Byzantine Church and Christian divergence. The church was closely tied to the state, and this is known as Caesaropapism. Caesars and Julius Caesar having absolute power and ultimate control, and papism is, that refers to the church. So the church being closely tied to the state and having some type of involvement in political affairs, that's Caesaropapism. The Byzantine Empire was head of both the state and the church. And the empire appointed the patriarch. He made doctrinal decisions, even could call church councils and get together. In Western Europe, there was no intense competition between political and religious authority, but there was in the East with the Byzantine Empire as the head of the church and the state. There was intense competition between political and religious authority in Western Europe. As soon as I said that, I knew it didn't make sense. But like I said, in the East, with the Byzantine Emperor, he controlled both. There were intense internal theological debates within the Orthodox faith, and these intense and complicated debates over the nature of Jesus and his relationship to the Trinity, Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, and whether or not icons should be used as representations of God and Jesus. And many of these disputes resulted in violence within Byzantium. Remember, Byzantine is the empire, Byzantium is the city. Okay. So, Orthodox Christianity was a very important, deep influence in all of Byzantine life. This legitimated imperial rule, provided a cultural identity in the Byzantine Empire. Even the pervasiveness of churches and icons and the common people engaged in theological disputes. And this is very important. Like I said, it even caused some violence. Now, with the Orthodox and Catholic divide, the schism within the Catholic Church, dividing into the Orthodox and the Catholic churches, both the the Western and the Eastern churches were Christian. They had similarities stemming from that shared faith. They each interpreted the faith in their own manner, were extremely suspicious of and hostile of the other faith. And when the Roman Pope declared that he was the head of all Christians, of course the Byzantine Emperor said he was the head of state and church, strongly disagreed. And in 1054, the representatives of both churches excommunicated each other, therefore saying that the other faith was not truly Christian, and They were no longer considered part of the church. So, Eastern Orthodoxy then develops and defined itself as in opposition to Latin Christianity, and Latin Christianity would be the Roman Catholic Church. Latin Christianity was centered on the Pope, who was in Rome, and there's a growing rift between the two parts of Christendom, and thus that developed that religious difference that reflected in even the Eastern and Western political differences. With the rise of Islam in Asia and Southwest Asia, Constantinople and Rome remained basically the sole hubs of Christendom. And there were some important Eastern and Western cultural differences. Language, philosophy, theology, church practice, the schism, in 1054 with the mutual excommunication of the Pope and the Emperor. The Crusades from 1095 on really worsened the situation with the church, despite the purpose in saving Christianity. It really weakened both the Byzantine Empire and parts of Western Europe. And during the Fourth Crusade, Westerners sacked Constantinople, which was a Christian city, in 1204, and ruled Byzantium for the next 50 years. And that also caused a lot of problems between the two groups, as the Western Europeans sacked and looted and pillaged in Constantinople. Now, Byzantium and the world. Byzantium had a foot in both Europe and Asia. They interacted intensively with its neighbors, and this is a continuation of the long Roman fight with the Persian Empire. It's not just the Persians, but there's also the Arabs and the Turks. Byzantium continued the Roman conflict with the Persian Empire, which in turn weakened both of them and allowed the Arabs to seize Persia. Byzantium held out against the Arab attacks using technology like Greek fire as an early form of flamethrowers. But the empire finally fell to the Turkish advance, thus allowing Islam into southeastern Europe. Byzantium was a central player in long-distance Eurasian trade. Byzantine coins, byzants, were a major Mediterranean currency for well over 500 years. And Byzantine crafts like jewelry and textiles, purple dye, silk, were all in high demand from its neighbors. And sitting at one of the key hinges of trade, the empire became very wealthy. Like I said, the coins were used as currency and even jewelry throughout the Mediterranean. And they produced for both domestic and external consumption. There's also some important cultural influence of Byzantium. They transmitted Greek learning to the Islamic world and to the West. So it's important to note their preservation of the Greek learning. Byzantine libraries preserved Greek texts from the golden age of the Hellenistic thought at a time when such learning was lost in Western Europe. And these texts would later be introduced to the West during the Renaissance. But they were the ones that introduced it to the Islamic world, and the Arabs preserved all of that learning in those manuscripts, and then, like I said, it was reintroduced to Western Europe. And there's even the transmission of Orthodox Christianity to the Balkans and Russia, and that's very important. The Slavic world and the Cyrillic alphabet, blocked to the south and the east by the Islamic world, the Byzantines spread their culture northwards, and that was Slavic lands. In the 9th century, two Byzantine missionaries, Cyril and Methodius, developed a writing system for the Slavs based on Greek letters. And since his name is Cyril, thus we have the Cyrillic alphabet. Cyrillic, named after Cyril. And this allowed for the translation of the Bible into their languages and thus the spreading of the faith. And so Orthodox Christianity became very important in the Balkans and Russia, and still is today. And so that takes us to the conversion of Russia. The most important conversion was that of Prince Vladimir of Kiev. Orthodoxy basically transformed the state of Rus, became central to Russian identity. Moscow finally declared itself to be the Third Rome, assuming the role of protector of Christianity after the fall of Constantinople. I want to go back up here to Rus. Kiev and Rus, this was a state in present Russia and the Ukraine, composed of diverse people, including Finns and Vikings and the Balts, as well as Slavs. The area engaged in long-distance trade networks along its rivers that linked Scandinavia to Byzantium. And the region had a diverse religious makeup of various nature gods and small numbers of Jews and Christians and Muslims. It's extremely diverse. And when Prince Vladimir of Kiev converted in the 10th century, he decided the state needed a religion that would link it to the outside world. And according to chronicles, he decided against Islam as his people were fond of drinking, perhaps a little too fond of drinking. But Eastern Orthodoxy was attractive as the Byzantine State was wealthy and powerful, and a marriage alliance sealed the decision. And importantly, this conversion was a free decision made without a military invasion, which also made it attractive. And the faith made deep, what's the word I'm looking for? Just a deep influence into the people of the region. And this idea of the Third Rome, the Rus borrowed extensively from Byzantium, including the use of icons, architectural styles, monastic traditions, even imperial control of the church. And when Constantinople fell in 1453, the Rus declared that they were the Third Rome, as the First Rome had abandoned its faith and the Second Rome had fallen to the Muslims. And so they were the protectors of Christianity and all of Christendom after Constantinople fell to the Muslims. And that's the conclusion of section 2.